printer doesn't. So. Okay.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Ken.
Hey, good to see y'all. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate everyone that's tuning in. I see we're having our people popping in right now and watching. Welcome to episode 251 of Line Upon Line. Tonight, we're going to talk about is being a vegetarian biblical, and did Paul give up eating meat? So, if you would start us off, Dr. Ricks, with a joke or two, or whatever you got there, we'll take it.
Okay, this has to do with eating. A guy from way back in the rural areas, he decides to come into the city to see a movie with a friend. After buying their ticket at the concession stand, he went over to the concession stand for some popcorn and a drink, and he hands the guy $1.50. He says, "That's what the price was the last time I was here." Well, said the grinning attendant. He says, "You're really going to be happy with yourself now. We now have sound."
Yeah. My dad always used to talk about going to the theater cost him a quarter or a dime or something like that back in the day.
Yeah, you can't get anything. I think when I was a little kid, you could get popcorn for $1 in a little box and 50 cents for a drink. It shows how old I am.
Actually, if they charge us a quarter or a dime today, we'd be paying for what what it's worth.
Yeah, you got to mortgage your house to get corn and a drink nowadays.
If you want the big bucket, they're asking for in a cup 2 drinks for. They're asking for a $20 bill. Is that outrageous or what?
That's exactly what it costs for. I think it's a big thing of corn and a drink is $20.
I'm thinking somehow this is like highway robbery. Popcorn, never mind.
Without the highway.
Yeah, without the highway. Why? Now, this one you have to listen to very, very carefully. Why men are not typically secretaries. Husband's note on the refrigerator to his wife. Someone from gynecologist called. They said the Pabst beer is normal. I didn't know you like beer. I think it's hitting Ken. He finally got it. Yeah, the Pabst beer, but the Pabst beer. It almost sounds like Pabst beer. Okay. Hospital visitation. Fred was unfortunate enough to be hit by a 10-ton truck and was loaded into the hospital in intensive care. His best friend, Morris, came to visit him. Fred struggled to tell Morris. He says, "My wife, Sally, visits me 3 times a day. She's so good. Every day she reads the same thing to me." Friend says, "Well, what does she read to you?" "My life insurance policy." My better half is smiling at me. Okay. We're going to talk about is being a vegetarian biblical, and did Paul give up eating meat? And that's really the big issue. Did Paul give up eating meat? By the way, when you go online, you'll find there's a big, big push toward becoming a vegan. And I know there are different kinds of vegetarians, but there's really big push becoming very popular. And I do understand at least 2 advantages it might have, and body mass index, that kind of thing. But people are now saying it's biblical. That it's biblical. By the way, before we get into the details, I want to make something. We are not medical doctors. So if you have problems with diabetes and diet and all those other medical, clinical issues, Our advice is only biblical. We're not giving you medical advice. Okay, so let's go to the first slide, please, Ken.
All right. All right, 1 Corinthians 8:13. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble.
Some people have taken this scripture and their enthusiasm for the vegan lifestyle to say, see, the Bible teaches that Paul gave up meat and we should all be vegetarians. The first thing I want to say is that one of the first rules in Bible study is context, context, context. Like they say in real estate, location, location, location. Well, in the Bible, it's context. At least that's the first thing to consider. When you look at the context of the scripture, much of the problem is cleared up. And I ask myself, if you want to misunderstand a verse or mislead yourself and others, use what's often been called tunnel vision. What do you think, Dave?
Well, the Bible wasn't written as like fortune cookies. I mean, you got to read the whole thing. And I guess Psalms and Proverbs, you could probably take some of those one at a time. But if you're going to study any subjects, you need to, as the name of the program, here a little, there a little, and line upon line and precept upon precept. So you got to think about who he's talking to, what he's talking about, when he was talking, and put it all in order. And then you got to see where else was it mentioned, what other prophet talked about the subject, and this is how you can come up with the understanding. But you can't just reach in there and reach down and pluck out one little piece and say, I've got the whole world right here with this one scripture. Because again, when Paul was talking to the church at Corinth and he was talking to the Romans, he was talking to different people. So he had to address them in ways that they would understand. So, that's that. I would like to note, though, I was talking with my doctor, I guess it's been a couple months ago now, the world's strongest man, the guy that's picking up cars that they put weight in, is actually a vegan.
Wow.
Yeah, that's very difficult to do. But he is actually a vegan and is considered the world's strongest man right now.
Let me ask you a question. You may know more about this, David, than I do. I do know when you go into some health food stores or some stores where they have material for bodybuilders, they have these, I guess I'll call them protein concentrates of all sorts, and stearic acid concentrates, powder where they, I guess they use soy and a lot of other things, and they boil down the protein and other amino acids and all those kinds of things. And you can have these big shakes, and I guess they really can help you bulk up. My only problem with that is most of those are fairly modern concoctions. If you go back, say, 60 or 70 years ago, I don't think any of those things would have been available, or very little of it.
Very little, and not the way they're making it today. I've done a lot of research on that because of being an athlete my whole life, and the one doctor. It's interesting we're talking about this because I went over today and he told me, he says, you need to buy this protein and stop taking that protein, and he sold me some protein, very expensive protein, I might add. But I do a lot of diet talk with him. I see him 2, 3, 4 days a week because he's kind of a buddy as well. And a couple of things he said. Harvard has a study where they went through blood type, and it's not biblical of any kind. It's just a science talking about the different meats and proteins and vegetables per blood type. And pork is not acceptable for any blood type. Red meat should only be eaten on this blood type once a week or twice a week. That blood type, not at all. This blood type, it should be no more than this many ounces. And he has all this science drawn out. A lot of the proteins as well, soy protein, men should never take soy protein because it raises your estrogen levels. And then the ones with the amino acids, you have to be careful, like L-cysteine is derived a lot of times from humans and from pork. So when you eat the L-cysteine amino acid, the BCAAs, that they may have actually taken that from something unclean, literally from human beings. So it does take a little research. You can't just walk in the store and say protein and it's good for you, because it could be, you got to figure out where it came from.
So you're saying unless you know what you're doing and you have some knowledge, you go to one of these stores, where they have all these signs of guys with muscles all bulked up, and you buy all these, I call them new and improved protein powders and the other amino acid powders and other things. You could also be doing yourself harm.
Absolutely.
You know what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Because I know that's and the problem is, for most of mankind's history, all these powders didn't exist.
Right.
Right. Most people stick with whey protein, and if you look for it, you can find beef protein.
Right. Carnivore is a brand that's real good with beef protein. That's the one he told me to stop taking right now because I've overdone it a little bit. So he's got me to switch to something else. I'm pretty lucky. I can be in the health food store and I can take my phone and send a text to a couple different doctors. And sometimes within minutes they go, avoid that brand, try this brand, or, get out of there, run for your life, But they're real helpful. And I tell you, this guy has done wonders for me. I've got a lot of damage over the years. And the one doctor that I was going to, who's a wonderful person, was not helping me. And I went to this other guy who I've known for 10 or 12 years. And I've made incredible gains. My strength is much better than should be at my age. And I'm doing I was just teasing my wife because none of my shirts fit anymore. They're getting tight on me, doing what he's telling me to do. So, but I'm working out really hard right now too. So it's a combination, but, he checks, he'll, I can send him, say, listen, I can literally take a picture of a meal and go, can I eat this? And he's pretty good. I mean, within minutes sometimes to say, yeah, I'm going to avoid those potatoes, or whatever. But so there's a lot of science that's proven the Bible to be really true as far as how the human body works.
And I'm just a general statement before we get into more verses. Obviously, you may need to go to nutritionists and doctors and experts, depending on your particular body chemistry. But I think in general, a balanced diet has proteins, vegetables, fruits, and whole grains in some appropriate mix is what God made for us. And I think that's good. Now, let's go. I'm going to just start off with the context. Most of you know this if you watched this program for a while, but the people in Corinth and in Rome, they had so many pagan temples, and they only need so much of the meat and fat to go to the idol. The rest of the meat was sold at discount to, well, I think shambles is a word some people call, I'll call them the local butchers of their day, would buy the meat. And a lot of the, Jewish and Jewish Christians would come by and say, well, has this meat been sacrificed to idols? Well, you know what answer they would give. What do you want to hear? They probably couldn't even remember which meat they bought from which temple and which meat is never bought from any temple. They tell you, so a lot of the Jews and Jewish Christians said, well, wait a minute. Maybe all this meat's been contaminated by paganism. So let's go to the next slide.
All right. 1 Corinthians 8:1. Now concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one.
And I think Paul is just making the obvious statement that, for mature Christians, probably a lot of the ones who grew up Jewish, they probably looked at those idols as more like artwork and nothing to be afraid of or worried about. But I believe those who grew up as pagans, maybe converted at age 40, their emotional attachment to those idols, they actually thought that meat was changed once it was offered to Zeus or Aphrodite or whichever of the gods and goddesses. And I think the weaker brothers were worried about it. And that's the context that Paul is discussing.
If you think about it, by avoiding it or by fearing it, you're giving some credence to that God that it was sacrificed to. So that's why it says it is nothing. There is only one God. Don't give this any thought.
Well, that's my thing too with these people that get upset about Christians or Jewish people having a strong religious faith, and they're atheist, and they're like, you have to stop believing that. You can't pray, you can't do. If there is no God, me praying in public or praying at school or praying by myself, which I don't pray in public, but how is that hurting you? Are you going to tell the schizophrenic guy who babbles to himself, that's it, there's nobody really here, so I want a law passed so that you can't babble by yourself? If we're crazy and there's nobody
not sure
there,
equating us with schizophrenics is a good show.
I haven't made my point yet, Ken. But interject Ken, now it changes everything.
No,
my point is,
if
it has no value, then why are you placing value on it? And if we're just crazy and there is no God, what are we hurting? What are we hurting?
And and the similarity I think we could look at nowadays, seeing how we don't see this stuff sacrificed to idols, and we don't see this kind of thing, is possibly Christmas. As people first come out of Christmas, they avoid it. I don't know if they fear it, but when they first come out of it, it's something that draws them probably back away from the truth, and you don't want to belittle that or make light of that because they're serious about it. But in reality, Christmas means nothing to us. It has no power over us. It doesn't draw us in. But when you see someone who struggles with it, you should not, make light of that and make light of the fact that they're struggling with it.
Right, and I think also that somebody who's quitting a pagan thing such as Christmas or whatever, they place such value on that throughout their life that they really need to get so far from it, because when they look at it, there is an emotional attachment that still hangs in there, and to break that, I think, would take some time and soul searching. And I knew somebody, and I asked, they came into the church, don't you miss Christmas? No. Years later, they said, you know what, the first couple of years, it was pretty hard. But they pushed away, and I don't miss it at all. They had to psychologically convince themselves that this isn't what I'm to be doing. But at the same time, it was a huge emotional attachment with family.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's the families. I never really liked Christmas because I got such horrible Christmas gifts. I'll tell you about that later. But it's the music and the family that was the problem. I won't go into the music now, but some of you know what I mean. It's the being with family members and the music that you miss, not so much Christmas. Well, that's me. But you can see how those who just came out of paganism, it had an emotional hold on them. Let's go to the next slide. And Paul is saying, be sensitive to these people.
All right, 1 Corinthians 8:10. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died.
To me, it seems obvious. He's saying you could probably, and I guess it would be like getting a real cheap meal, maybe even making business contacts. You could go to little restaurants on the flanks of the temple, and you would just laugh it off. But for people who are coming out of that same pagan temple, converting to Christianity, it might lure them. They'll defile their conscience as they see it and lure them back into paganism, and they may lose their salvation. And Paul is saying, is it worth it? And he's saying, no, you have to think of the weaker brethren as well as yourself. And I gave this example once, and then somebody said they were offended by it. I hope it doesn't offend anybody else. But they said, you don't really understand how alcoholism works. That's what the guy who was offended by it. I said, well, let's say if someone has a problem with alcoholism, but then a group of people in the church who don't. And like if you're in a place like England where they go to pubs on a regular basis to drink, and at least in Germany and England, from what I saw, a lot of men can go in these pubs, drink 2 or 3 beers, and in Germany I see more than that, and they don't get drunk. and whatever it is, tolerance over time. With this guy, if they lured him into going, he'd be drunk and off the wagon, and could lead to disaster for him. And so you shouldn't encourage him to go to the pub with you. I guess that's the best way to put it. And the guy said, "Well, you don't really understand alcoholics. And my example offended him, so I'm not. Hope this doesn't offend any of the people fighting alcoholism out there."
My neighbor has a bad drinking problem, and he has not drank now in probably 13 months, I think. And he looked at me, this is a month ago maybe, and he said, "How often do you drink?" And I said, "Well, probably I had a half a beer last month." And it's one of the holy days. I said, "I had a half a beer." He goes, "How do you drink half a beer?" I said, "Well, my wife drank the other half." And he goes, "How do you do that?" He goes, I can't take one taste. Then I go crazy. I've got to drink everything I can get my hands on. And there's a difference. I've never had that craving. I don't have that problem. I can take a sip out of a beer and say, "Oh, that's it. You taste it and you can have it," which is what we did that night because I didn't like it. It was too sweet. And she likes sweet stuff. But this is a deep problem with him. And they've got him on a medication now that he's been off of this for, I think, 13 months. And he does seem happier, more productive. But when he said that to me, I never thought about it. How do you drink a half a beer? I don't know. Everything I get is half. I got to give everything to her. I'm used to half.
You're a smart man, right?
When we go out to dinner, she picks the two things that she thinks she would like. She tastes them both. The one she likes best, she eats, and I get the other one. It's simple. But
actually, going out and eating in a restaurant and my wife and I splitting a meal, it's really not such a bad idea. Eat less that way. Anyway.
Oh, no, there's no eating less. We order 2 full meals. And I'll eat a quarter of one, and she'll eat 1 and 3 quarters. I
don't know. I have a hard time believing that, but I better set up.
But she just works harder than me. That's why she stays looking so great.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. You're the light eater. I can believe. Never mind.
If you hear a loud scream from Dave's end, you'll know what it is. All right. 1 Corinthians 8:12. But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ.
Because Christ paid a lot for that person, and you're not helping when you lure them off the wagon or whatever it is you're doing. And that's why Paul said he didn't want to eat any meat if necessary. Let's go to the next slide. I think the context will help us understand it a little better. Then we'll get to the more controversial stuff.
All right. 1 Corinthians 10:24. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness.
Now realize that even though they weren't supposed to eat meat sacrificed to idols because it would offend the Jewish brothers, and I know that's in the Bible, but Paul is very pragmatic. Isn't that a very pragmatic decision? Don't ask. You don't want to know. Plus, the butcher probably couldn't tell you honestly for sure anyway. You don't want to know whether the meat was sacrificed to idols because it doesn't really matter. Idol is nothing.
Right. And people will use this to say you can eat pork because it was sold in the meat market. I mean, this is the kind of things that they use to fit their narrative.
Yeah, and that's not. See, these would all be Jews or mostly converts to Judaism. They call them God-fearers. These people clearly would know clean and unclean meat, and they would certainly hear it read in the synagogues and all that. They would know. So Paul doesn't have to keep reminding of that. He's talking about clean meats. But like you say, Ken, that's another example of tunnel vision. Take that verse.
I had a guy last night said, if it's on my plate, God gave it to me. And what do you say to that? Somebody asked about diet or whatever, and I said, well, listen, I went I went probably 14 or 15 years. Basically was vegetarian. I didn't eat any red meat, and I said I've never had bacon or pork or anything like that. And this guy goes, "Well, what do you eat?" I go, "Turkey, clean fish, chicken." There's a lot of stuff to eat. But he goes, "Oh, what do you eat if you don't eat pork and you don't eat pepperoni?" And then he started quizzing my wife. "Well, don't you make this pork dish for him?" And she's like, "No, I don't do that." And they have no ability. Some people can't fathom that there's another way to live a life, So, and this guy's an educated guy. I figured he was smarter than that.
I have heard so-called experts say we should eat less red meat and more fish, turkey, and chicken. By the way, one thing about turkey, for those who want to try turkey bacon, turkey has less fat, and that's a good thing, and yet it has protein.
Joel Osteen, I'm the biggest fan of Joel Osteen. I can't tell you. He came out and said, we just locked the door so nobody can leave. But eating pork is not biblically, you're not allowed to do that biblically. It's a sin.
You said that on television?
I'll find that clip for you. It's on YouTube. And he said, and I'm going to be honest with you, I recently realized this and I stopped eating pork. And he says, and I ate turkey bacon and it's actually better. He says, it's really good. But biblically, you're not to eat some. And then he mentioned shrimp and shellfish and stuff. He goes, what I'm saying is not popular, but that is what God says.
Wow.
Yeah, he really said that. I was a broken clock, right?
It's right at least 2 times. Never.
Well, he got one.
And by the way, Paul says further, we're not going to read the scripture. If you read everything, Paul further says, if someone brings up the fact that the meat has been offered to an idol, then Paul said, don't eat it. Not because it's going to hurt you, but because it would give the impression that you're joining them in worshiping whatever, let's say if they said it went before the god Jupiter, that you're joining him in worshiping the god Jupiter. And so you're doing it for the other man's sake, not for yours. I think I do understand that too. So if somebody makes an issue that the meat went before a particular god or goddess, then you shouldn't eat it. But not because the meat will hurt you, just for the sake of, you don't want to give people the impression that you're worshiping pagans or making it easier for them to worship pagans.
Well, and Paul addresses that in his letter to the Romans after he goes through all of the abominations that they do or did in Romans 1. He says, but not only those who accept them. So if you accept those behaviors, you're guilty of the sin as well. So I'm not saying run in the restaurant and snatch somebody's pork chop off their plate, but you should be readily available to say, hey, that's not healthy. And there's a lot of reasons behind not eating that. A vegetarian diet is a much healthier diet than a high protein diet because it creates the vegetarian diet creates a more alkaline system, and your cancer cannot live in an alkaline system, where the protein, the animal proteins create a more acidic system, and cancers can grow in that. So there's a lot to be said about limiting your animal product.
By the way, remember we said that we're not doctors, so I was just asking, are you sure? You sure? Let's say if somebody cuts out beef out of their diet, you sure they couldn't get cancer? I'm just throwing out the question.
They absolutely could get cancer, but it helps to not. It's easier, less taxing on your system. I'll say something that's kind of terrible, and I don't know how to say it, but my younger brother and I ate very differently. We had the same parents, and when I decided to become more vegetarian, and basically he picked on me terribly, but his cholesterol was very high, and he died last year. And
I remember that.
And he aged. He was younger than me, but he'd lost a lot of his hair, and what he had was white. And a lot of other things. He didn't do like aerobic workouts, and a lot of other things. But his diet was not a healthy diet. And looking at my family, the men on my mother's side don't make it very long. And so I'm trying to not do nothing they did.
By the way, I'm going to jump ahead of what I was going to originally, the order it was in. Now that, because I think that, then we'll get back to other things. We said in the paper that because meat is relatively cheap in America, I mean, as a percentage of your income, a lot of countries, people spend 50, 60% of their income for food. If they want a lot of beef and, a lot of solid meat, they're going to have to really pay. So meat is relatively cheap in America. And that has a bad side. The bad side is Americans eat too much meat, at least many of us think so, eat too much fatty meat and deep fried meats. And third, we eat too much fast food meat. And I've known a few people who stopped cooking for various and sundry reasons. They had all their food out of fast food restaurants. That is bad for your health.
It is. And it's something it's Dave's theory. I'm not speaking for the church. It's just Dave's theory. But I think when God made Adam and Eve in the garden, he made them vegetarian. And when you think about it, it's easy to look up at a tree and go, I think I'm hungry. I think I'll eat this. It's a lot harder to kill something, wrangle it to the ground, skin it out, gut it, clean it, cook it, and so then the next thing would be smaller things like fish or chickens, where the family could eat in one meal. And then killing a full cow, I don't think that was done very often, because what do you do with all that extra meat when you consider it that way? So, excuse me. I think that we were made, if you think about it, to eat those nuts and those seeds and the fruit much more readily, the leafy things, and then maybe for the evening meal or something, a chicken or a fish.
Also, I know this is common sense, but I bet there are a lot of people who don't think about it enough. We need to also eat more vegetables and more fruits.
I always thought vegetarian was caveman for bad hunter. I thought that was some kind of a term. If you look it up, I'm sure you can find that.
Can you turn the air conditioning up a little bit? It's hot. Caveman for bad hunter. Yeah. By the way, here's a possibility. In the Old Testament, when they said if they brought an ox for an offering, certain fats and innards were burned on the altar to God, and a certain chunk of the meat went to the priest. But the majority of the meat went to the person who made the offering. Well, let's say the guy probably had his little ranch or farm ranch. He may have had 5 or 6 workers and their family and his family. They basically, it was like a barbecue. I mean, like in Kansas City is known for beef barbecue. Really good stuff too. I was in Kansas City last week. My point is, but they didn't get to do that often. It was like a special occasion. And so I think that's probably how a lot of the beef was eaten, special occasions.
How we did it when I started eating beef again, because of the church, frankly. We were at a cookout. Dr. Ricks, you were there. This is a long time ago. And they had a cookout at the beach, and we had the option of hot dogs or hamburgers. And I told her, I said, I don't eat either one of these things, but I guess the hamburger's probably going to be more healthy than the hot dog. So I ate that, and I said, I know I'm going to, because I hadn't had one in 15 years or something. I said, I know I'm going to be sick. Well, the next day I wasn't. And I said, it's not a sin to eat this, so maybe periodically I should. So we started eating the red meat, but only on the holy days. Trying to, just for us personally, and that's when we did it. Now, I talked with my doctor today, and I said, I've been eating a small piece of red meat, small piece, once a week, because I'm working out. I want that beef protein. And he told me that he did not think that it was going to hurt me once a week. But if I lived on it 3 times a day, it's like God says it's okay to swim, it's okay to fish, it's okay to drink water, but he doesn't want you to drown, So there's got to be some balance in what you do.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're saying, a little balance, and it may vary with the person's body chemistry and all that sort of thing. Here's the thing I want to say is, I think the big push toward vegetarianism and the emphasis that it's more spiritual than eating a little meat and cheese and eggs, etc., is, I think, a new push that the world is into, but I believe it's an incorrect way to look at it. In other words, whether you're a vegan or not, it is not does not make you more spiritual. Let's go to our next slide.
All right. 1 Timothy 4:1. But the Spirit speaks expressly that in later times some shall apostatize from the faith, giving their mind to deceiving spirits and teachings of demons, speaking lies in hypocrisy, cauterized as to their own conscience, forbidding to marry, bidding to abstain from meats, which God has created for receiving with thanksgiving for them who are faithful and know the truth.
No, in other words, actually, as I say, the Bible does not support the idea that giving up things that are good for you is kind of ascetic, like a proper amount of meat and the proper, proper amount of lean meat is good for you. So it does not make you more spiritual to be vegan. I think it's a philosophy that the world is pushing, but it is not a biblical thing. Let's go to Romans 14:1, because this section, this next slide, states something that I think is kind of shocking when you read it just bluntly. When you see it.
I just want to make a point. Every time they have someone that is an older person, maybe 100 years old or 110 years old or more, I always ask them what their secret is to longevity. I have never once heard one of them say, I'm a vegan or a vegetarian. They always say things like wine, chocolate, or something like that. They never ever say, I'm a vegetarian, and that's why I lived to 110 years old. Never. So just an observation. I just thought I'd put that out there.
Well, I know somebody in my house that agrees with you. Let me tell you.
All right. Romans 14:1. Welcome a man of weak faith, but not for the purpose of deciding doubtful points. One man has faith to eat anything, but he whose faith is weak eats only vegetables.
Would you read that last phrase one more time, Ken? That last phrase afterward, but.
One man has faith to eat anything, but he whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. He who eats meat must not despise the man who abstains, and let not the man who abstains judge him who eats, for God has received him.
And that verse says two things rather clearly. You shouldn't judge people whether they're vegans or not. And you shouldn't say, well, we're more superior to you because we eat meat, or the vegans would say, we're more superior to you because we don't. And actually, the one who's the pickiest and frightened of the meats in the temple is actually the weak brother. He says that. Vegetarian's a weak brother. And that's kind of a shocker, because you would think the one who's picky and afraid and overly picky is the strong brother. Here's what I found. People who are overly picky and worried about things, especially physical things, are weaker. And I'm not saying they won't eventually grow to become stronger, but they're weaker, and their focus is on picky things like eating and how many cups you can wash on the Sabbath day. I call it physical things instead of the bigger spiritual picture.
Right. And I think this whole thing about eating meat or not eating meat, when they're talking in the context that we just had, was talking not physically who can pick up the biggest rock, but who is spiritually the weakest person. And spiritual strength is more important than physical strength all day long, because you're going to, and this is being a little silly, but as long as your spirit is strong, you have the spirit to carry on and live and accomplish things. When your spirit is broken, you accomplish nothing. And that's just talking about the human spirit. So spiritually, meaning your relationship with Christ and with God the Father and the Holy Spirit, that has probably very little to do with whether or not you had a chicken sandwich or a beef sandwich for lunch. How many sprouts you can get down. I found an interesting scripture that I use this to illustrate something, if I can just throw it in the mix. If it's not already in the notes, it's Genesis 9. In verse 3, everything that lives and moves will be food for you, just as I gave you the green plants. I now give you everything. If you think about it, everything that lives and moves is food for you. But then he clarifies that and says, as I have given you the plants. He's given us all the animals, but some of them we should not eat, and he's given us all the plants, but some plants, if you eat them, you die, so you have to be, we can have that plant and you can go ahead and eat it, but then you may not be here in the morning. And so he clarifies that everything that moves is food for you, the same as the plants. So the point of that is that everything you read has got to be put into context, and you got to understand why he's saying it, who he's talking to, what he's talking about, and then how does this relate to the people here, but how does that relate to me in 2018 as well?
And one way to look at it is God has placed a lot of good things like fish and lamb and chicken on earth for mankind. I mean, they're used humanely, of course, humane standards for handling and butchering, but everything on this earth, including all the pears and apples, are all for our benefit. My bigger thought is that, and though it's hard to do, our focus should be on our spiritual life. Still try to eat a good, healthy diet, don't get me wrong, but don't worry and spend all your energy over physical things like food.
Absolutely. I have a friend of mine who's going through some hard times, and he's been very, very sick because of it. And the doctor just got him on some stuff. It's all natural, whatever, but it's calmed his nerves. And the guy's actually putting a little weight on because it's calmed his mind, and he's feeling better. He's more functioning, functions better. He doesn't have a relationship with God. I think that had he had that relationship with God, he actually mentioned that his doctor said, I'm not here to talk religion with you, but we've got to get you to reach a balance because you're so upset. And if you have a good relationship with God, there's such a calming, relaxation, safety there that these other things become a little less important, I think.
I heard someone say this the other day, but it made sense. He said, depression, of course, is not a sin. But sinful behavior, one of the attributes of bad sinful behavior is depression. In other words, the more you can spiritually follow God's way, the happier you'll be, all things said and done.
And if you're happy, you're going to feel better, you're going to function better, you're going to accomplish more, you're going to sleep better. It really works. And so you've got to have that relationship with God. Regardless of your diet. And again, diet is very important, but you got to have that biblical sound relationship. And you need to be with others of like mind. Iron sharpens iron. And you got to have that spiritual relationship with somebody that you can sit and talk about the things that we know our salvation is important and relies on. And when you have that, it just creates more harmony in your life. And these things become a little less important, I think.
Let me ask Ken. Ken, what do you think about that statement about the man that said that depression, at least in part, can come from bad, sinful behavior?
It can. Yeah, I can see that. It doesn't necessarily have to, though. It could just be someone's own inability to compartmentalize or to pull oneself out of. Sometimes depression is just something that happens to a person. They fall into it, and it's real easy to tell someone, well, just, don't be depressed. Well, that never works, and it does no good for the person who is depressed. But people who have never experienced just say, yeah, just feel better, just get out of it, or just, snap out. It doesn't work that way. It's very difficult to get out of it, for someone to bring themselves out of that. It has to be them, and it has to be the people around them that support them to help bring them out of it. Sometimes it takes a short period of time. Sometimes it could take a very long period of time. But the closer you draw to God, the more you understand the Bible, the more you understand what's going to happen to you. And the further you get away from the flesh and the closer you get away to the Spirit and the Holy Spirit and the Father, the easier it becomes to get out of those things, get out of the funk or the depression that draws people into it.
Also, if I could add, depression generally is associated with a lack of hope. And if faith is hope, and if you have faith in God, then He's not going to put anything on you you can't carry. You know. Now, once in a while, God thinks you're a Navy SEAL, and He drops a lot on you. But you should also say to yourself, look at the faith God has in me, that I'm going to get through this, and that I'm going to go back to Him on my knees. And have through that faith, you're going to have the hope. And when you have that hope, you see a light at the end of the tunnel. And the depression will be more manageable and maybe go away too, because God can cure all things, including depression.
Right. I think when someone is in a church and slips into it, it's mainly because they have lost focus, or because they're not quite as I don't know, I would say lost focus, or lets the world draw them back into it. And that's not the reason so much they get depressed, is just they allow the world in, and they pump these little tiny problems up, which really don't amount to anything, especially once you get through it, and they pump them up into these giant monster problems. And because you didn't have the faith that you should, that's where you end up. But it's like I said, it's very hard to draw yourself out of that once you get into it.
Well, my buddy's problems are not little problems. He's getting really slammed, and I think anybody in his shoes would have some depression. But again, if he had a relationship with God, that would really help. You know,
it would be more manageable.
I'm trying to counsel with him because he doesn't have any brothers or sisters, and he'll call me sometimes pretty down, and I can hear it in his voice. And I told him he can call me and talk as much as he wants, anytime he wants. And this week's the first time he's been able to go back to work because of the physical issues he's having as well. I mean, he's getting it. His mother has Alzheimer's and doesn't know who he is, and he's having to take care of her. I mean, he's getting it from every angle. I sure hope that this is maybe is God pulling him into the church, you know.
That's interesting. You know, I'm tempted to say that good diet, exercise, and getting enough sleep, you'll probably feel better. There is a connection between the physical and the spiritual. We can't deny that.
There is. No, you're right about that. You're absolutely right.
And so, sometimes getting enough sleep is some small thing. It depends on, you know, I know some people can function with only 3 hours of sleep and do well. But unless you're sure that's you probably need to move around, get exercise, get enough sleep, and you'll feel better. And eat a decent diet. Let's go to the next scripture. All
right, Romans 14:19. So then let us follow after things which make for peace, and things by which we may build one another up.
Ken, let me ask you this one. When you read that scripture, would you say that is the goal that people should have when they go to local church meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. That should be part of it anyway. I think too many times there may be one or two people, depending on the group, that does pretty much just the opposite of that. That is something we need to avoid. And if we're doing that and causing that, we need to, you know, as individuals, we need to step back and look and stop that.
Yeah, again, iron sharpens iron. And in Hebrews 10, where it says, you know, don't give up meeting together as some have. That meeting together is to Bible study, but it's also to be brothers and sisters in Christ, and ask how you doing, how you feeling, how's your work. And that way you know how to pray for them. If you don't tell me, hey, I stubbed my toe, how do I know to pray for you stubbing your toe? And by the way, I did this week. It's throbbing. But, you know, you've got to have that ability, and we should be there to just to share a hug. You know, it makes a difference. It really does. Especially when a lot of people come into the church and they lose their families and their friends and their job because they won't work on the Sabbath and things. We really need to be there and say that there is a light at the end of this tunnel.
And I just think that whole principle of build each other up is a great thing to think about. Build each other up. And instead of, and Paul would say in the case of the letter to the Romans, instead of fighting over who's a vegan and who's a meat eater and who's more pure spiritually and who isn't, Paul would say, stop all that stuff. especially if you're the strong one, and build each other up instead of tear each other down. Um, by the way, let's go to the next slide. This is one that it probably is a bit surprising, but it's something we ought to talk about. Oh, there's one more. Did we get the one from Daniel?
I don't. Anything that was in the email, I copied over.
Okay.
Maybe I missed it. I don't know.
Daniel 1:8. Did I get that one in there?
I don't see it.
Okay. Well, I'll just mention it. Maybe it didn't get in. It's in that last page of the paper. But in this case, Daniel did not want to eat. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8 to 15. Daniel did not want to eat the exotic food of the emperor and the wine. We don't have a whole lot of details. Obviously, there was a lot of unclean meat in there, because things we know, like they ate, oysters and squirrels. I know people actually ate squirrels, and all kinds of weird stuff was considered. By the way, do you know there was a time in history when the peasants were healthier than the royalty, because the royalty ate a whole lot of garbage, including white flour instead of whole wheat. The whole wheat, they gave that to the peasants, and a lot of exotic bad meats that, in other words, the peasants couldn't afford the exotic food and they were healthier for it. One of those weird historical things. But the point is, Daniel wouldn't eat all the meat. He ended up with just vegetables and water and was healthier. That may surprise people. They say, well, how's that possible? I think it was just that the royal food was just that decadent. Best way to put it.
There's a diet trend going through a lot of the churches of the world. They call it the Daniel diet. I'd never heard of this until a few years ago. But what they'll do, the church will get together as a church for 21 days, and they eat nothing but fruit, vegetables, all uncooked, and water. And they feel like it's a growing thing to do in the church. And I talk with a lot of them, and and it's different religions. It's not just like Baptist or Lutherans. It's all these different types are doing what they call the Daniel diet. And there's nothing wrong with that. It builds camaraderie in their group, I guess, and it's a good cleansing diet, keeping you healthy. So, interesting thing. I'd never heard of it until a couple years ago.
All right, we do have that slide now. I'll read it real quick. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's dainties, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. The prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink, for why should he see your faces worse looking than the youths who are of your own age? So would you endanger my head with the king? Prove your servants, I beg you, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. At the end of 10 days, their faces appeared fairer, and they were fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate of the king's dainties.
And I think, just like we said, that a lot of royal food was expensive, but decadent and spoiled, not healthy for you. By the way, if you know how to be a vegetarian, how to get the right proteins and all those other things you need, it can be very healthy for you if you know how to do that. But there are some dangers to being a vegetarian if you don't do it right. If you don't get enough iron, you can have a lack of energy. And if you don't get enough B12, you can have a B12 deficiency.
D.
And absorbing calcium, which you can get from meat. Obviously, it's easier if you're a vegan who does eat fish, cheese, milk, and dairy products and butter, but some vegans don't. They have no animal products at all. It's a lot harder. So there are some, Although now we have more artificial vitamins and proteins, which didn't exist, centuries in the past, or you can maybe, but like David said, you have to know what you're doing when you try to compensate for the things you don't get because you're eating no meat.
Yeah, and back to what David said, I do all of this with the doctor. So, I have a couple doctors that I talk to frequently, and one is walking distance from my business. So I just drive in there and walk right in his office and sit there until he walks out. So, or I'd send him text. So I'm doing everything that I'm doing with the doctor, and 20 years ago, whatever it was, 25 years ago, I started becoming more vegetarian. I did that with the doctor as well. I didn't listen. I actually gained weight. And he came in and sat me down one day and he says, "What you doing?" I told him, and he said, "You're doing it all wrong." So just not eating animals is not necessarily the answer. There's a right way to do it. So, and when I started doing what he told me, I got in better shape. It worked, but trying to figure it out on my own was not the way to go.
Yeah, a balanced diet is best, and like we said, but none of us probably eats as healthy as we could or should. Anybody that says, "Oh, I never want to eat food that's not healthy," and actually, I think that, though I'm probably not the best example to ask, but a little bit of fun food now and then is not bad as long as you don't overdo it. But if you have special health problems, you better talk to a doctor about it.
Yep, I joined the organization for my diet, PETA. So people eating tasty animals. So I kind of stick with that. It's been working out for me real well.
It's called what?
PETA. People eating tasty animals.
PETA.
Anyway.
People eating. Oh, they're going to love that. People eating tasty animals. PETA. Ken's going to read our last verse.
All right, Romans 1:25. Who exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen.
And one of the thoughts that I've expressed before is that the focus in this world is so much on earth worship, animal worship, where some people actually put the rights of animals ahead of the rights of people. I mean, literally, baby seals have more rights than human babies. I mean, if you read some of the things they do and say, trees have more rights than people. They're worshiping the creation instead of the creator, like the sun, the moon, and animals. And God condemns that as part of the, I call it, pagan worldliness that goes on. And that is the problem I think we all have to avoid. We're being slowly led into earth worship.
An interesting thing, it's kind of a sidebar, but I used to run the security for Ringling Brothers Circus. And one time we had an area where these animal rights activists were going to protest because the animals were being treated so badly, which I would love to have the life they've got. I mean, they've got it made. They don't bathe themselves. I know, it's great. But these people were given a spot where they could protest, and they were going, "Hi, children," and they were dressed like clowns, but I think that's just how they dressed. And they were handing out coloring books to the children. I'm serious. I'm not. It was bad. And so I got one of the coloring books. And I'm like, why are they who hate the circus and all this giving these free coloring books? And we started going to the parents going, don't let them look in the coloring book, because the coloring books were horrible. The story about how the animals they're going to color the animals while they tortured them with electricity. And nothing like that happened ever. And the whole different earth worship people have a whole different mind than you've ever dealt with, I think.
And they're getting to be more and more popular. It's kind of scary. And it's the direction I think the world is going in. I just thought on world affairs, one thought occurred to me. I was listening to one of the financial gurus, something I didn't realize. The Chinese stock market, it dropped over 5%, and before that even more. The American market, well, at least the last day or two, is kind of flattened out. In Europe, it has dropped a lot more than ours. And his point was, we're not in a trade war. We're in the early firing shots of tough trade negotiations. But China needs us more than we need them. And the way he put it, he says, look, China sells us all kinds of stuff we could put tariffs on. They don't buy that much stuff from America. There'll be limited amount of tariff. I mean, I know they're going to hit soybeans and other things, but beyond that, there's not a whole lot of things they can put tariffs on. Europe is a little bit more complex, but even still, I think the Europeans need us more than we need them. And I get what he's saying is everybody's scared spitless that that financial disaster will strike America at any moment. He doesn't think so. You know, it'll be a little rough. Negotiations are always going to be tough because they've have had unfair trade practices with America probably for 40 some years, maybe China a little less, maybe 20 some years, but they're not going to give that up easily. They're going to put up a fight. But America is in a stronger position. At least I think he's right.
Well, it's like we've been in this position for so long. It's gonna be a little pain fixing it. I mean, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid. Is gonna be some issue with putting everything right with tariff and trade and all these countries that have taken advantage of us. And actually, I'm sure they think it's funny and laugh behind closed doors of what we let them get away with. But it's going to be a little pain with it, but it will right itself, and then we'll see the benefit of that. And the fact that the economy is going so well at this end helps ease that pain a little bit. I think, seeing how we've got so much employment now. I mean, people are looking for jobs everywhere, as far as looking for help everywhere. They're looking for people to fill jobs. Help wanted signs are everywhere.
Yeah, I was in St. Louis the other week. And in a lot of stores, they had help wanted signs, much more than they had 3 or 4 years ago. I thought, wow. At any rate, he's telling people not to panic and sell your stocks or think the world's coming to an end because we're hearing that Angela Merkel and others are mad at America. And I understand their position. Europe, at least many countries in Europe, have much higher unemployment. And so they do have more economic problems. I'm sure they don't want to give up any advantages they have. And China has problems too. We just don't know about them because we don't have the kind of press that we can see their society like they can see ours. But the truth is, he says, we're in a better position. And I think the president is fighting for American industries to come back. And I'm hoping he can gain some level. It'll probably never be like it was 50 years ago, but maybe he can get some of it, a good deal of it back, and that would be wonderful. I think one reason young men have problems in today's society, they can't get jobs in which they can support a family in. And if a young man can get a job where he's making enough money, he's more likely to get married and have kids than if he can't get such a job. I know if he's got special skills and special education and all that, but we're talking about average guys, not superstars.
Right. Well, I mean, nowadays an average guy can get a job being a plumber and being a electrician in short order and be making superstar money. In the environment we're in now, they're paying big money for those positions as people aren't getting into them.
If you can just apprentice in it, if you can just apprentice in
plumbing, they're all looking. They're all looking.
If you can get an apprenticeship in one of those fields, hang in there for a year or two, you'll make really good money. But too many kids are not getting the apprenticeship. Well, at least that's what I think. They
don't want to do those jobs, but they should, because you can get into them. You don't need a college education. You don't need to go into $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 in debt to get them, and you can make more money than people coming out of college.
I think in many cases, everyone wants an office job, an easy office job, a college degree. It depends on what you major in college and all that. A lot of college degrees really don't prepare you for any job in particular. And they teach you to be unpatriotic to America. I don't know. That's just not good for the workers.
Our county sheriff says he's hiring people with master's degrees that are 4% above the poverty level.
Wow.
And that's what I mean. That's where they start out, 4% above poverty. He said 4% less money they could go on food stamps and have a master's degree.
Yeah, the degrees aren't worth. Well, there are always look at it, different ways to look at it, but apprenticeship would be so much more valuable in today's market than unless you're a great scholar, you get in some special field, but unless you're going to be a medical doctor or something like that. Otherwise, just a mediocre college degree and a mediocre college student I don't think it's hardly worth it. I know I shouldn't say that, but that seems to be the way things are.
It's
but
true.
I've got a student, man. He's the dumbest guy in the world on one level, and on the other level, he's Einstein. And he, at 14 years old, was the repair guy for Sears or one of those companies. He went and did all the classes, and when they would get a call to go do a warranty repair, he'd have to find somebody to drive him over because he wasn't allowed to drive. And he would go repair it. And today he's got, dozens of trucks on the road, and he's a little older than me. And this guy's making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and he's living large, and he's out working 50, 60 hours a week still because that's all he knows to do. And he gets out and he works, and his son works with him, and he's got all these crews that go all over the state and repair these things. And I don't know if he can spell the word college. I don't think he can spell GED, but he's doing a great job. I mean,
that is wrong, man.
Yeah, I say it to him, so I'm not talking bad about the guy behind his back. But,
he's doing well.
He's doing very well, and he was smart. He stuck to it, and he's frugal with his money, and he's done things right, and he's been blessed for it. So just the fact to have a paper that says, I think the Wizard of Oz discussed that. If I give you a paper, you're going to have a brain. Except for I know an awful lot of people with papers that don't have brains.
No comment. I understand that. Paul Hyper-D. But my only point is, prophetically speaking, people think, the end is coming. America's about to collapse financially because of trade war. Obviously, we could be wrong, and America could be ready to collapse, and the trade war could go very, very badly. But I actually think that we will come out of these opening rounds of trade disputes. America will come out with a better economy, and we are still the center of world trade and the world's #1 economy. Remember a couple of years ago, they said China's going to be the world's #1 economy? It didn't happen. And it ain't going to happen this year either. I mean, we'll see. Obviously, things could change suddenly. God could curse America. All of our crops could go bad. The weather could go, anything is possible. But assuming nothing stupendously disastrous happens, America is still going to be the #1 economy in the world. And I wouldn't worry about stock prices. At least I don't think we're looking at a great collapse. I know the media will get you all fired up that Donald Trump is crazy and the world's going to fall apart any second. I don't believe that. I think Trump is smarter than he is given credit for. People underestimate him. Now, some people argue the question, well, is God going to bless America? Maybe that is a tougher question to answer. And I'm divided on it. There are still a lot of people who are, relatively speaking, Bible-oriented, family-oriented, and who are praying for America and want America to do the right thing. I realize you don't hear from those people. In the media, you only hear about the crazies.
Yeah. Before we go, I wanted to make a couple of observations. One, we got an email this week from Frederick, and I'm not going to give his last name, but he mentioned something about a chat room that he sees. If there's a chat room out there that I'm not familiar with, if someone sees that on either on the video or something, let me know. Just point it out to me because I don't see it at my end. So if somebody sees it out there and knows what he's talking about, help me out and just send me a link or something, or give me an email. And then someone requested a show topic, and we talked about this before the program tonight. Once saved, always saved. Now, I know we've done programs that have that as the theme or part of the theme, but I don't think we ever did one that was strictly on that, because I searched, I couldn't find it unless we named it something completely different. But I think we may get into that one. I don't know how soon, but we mentioned that before.
Well, you want to? We can commit to it unless something goes wrong. We'll do. Does the Bible say once saved, always saved next week? And you can go ahead and promote it. You got any promotion money left, Ken?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And we can get you some more in the near future, because online promotions seem to be helpful in today's world.
I get it. I get some response. We get some clicks. We get some interest. So yeah, we'll keep doing it.
I want to mention that Mark Armstrong's going to be down here July 18th. Is that what it is?
July 28th.
July 28th. He'll be here in Tampa. So
in Tampa, not Orlando, right?
Yeah, Tampa, not Orlando.
Okay.
Oh, all right. Sounds good. So if you're in the area and you can make it, that'd be great. A great Sabbath. Go down there and see him and everyone else down there. So, if you can, I would suggest you make it. Let's see here. All right. If that's all we have for tonight, I'm going to sign us out. And I want to say again, thank you, everyone, for watching us tonight. Everything went real well. Everybody hung in there. Everybody's computer held up. And like I said, we thank you for that. And we'll watch, or we'll see y'all back here next week.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.